Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is officially January 2026.
Yeah.
The holidays are over, decorations are coming down, and usually, right about now, the movie theaters turn into a bit of a wasteland. Dump month.
Oh, yeah. It is traditionally a very quiet time for cinema, or, a very bad one.
Exactly. But this year,
Mm.
we are diving headfirst into something that is bucking that trend completely. There is this massive buzz right now surrounding the new entry in the 28 Days franchise.
We are talking about 28 years later, The Bone Temple.
We are.
And it is definitely the conversation of the moment, though maybe not for the reasons people expected.
Right. And to help us navigate all this, we're looking at a breakdown from film critic Jeremy Johns. But we're not just going to run through the plot like a checklist.
No.
We really need to figure out what this movie is because it's doing something honestly kind of bizarre with its format. The reviewer calls it a DLC pack for the main 28 Years Later film.
Which is such a fascinating modern way to describe a piece of cinema.
It stopped me in my tracks when I read that. I mean, usually when you hear DLC downloadable content, your brain goes straight to video games.
Right, like an extra mission pack.
Yeah, you buy Call of Duty, you finish it, and then for 20 bucks you get the extra maps.
Yeah.
But applying that to a movie, a big theatrical movie, that feels weird.
It does.
It feels almost derogatory, doesn't it? Like it's not a real movie.
It does sound a bit dismissive at first, like it's incomplete or just, a cash grab. But here, the source suggests it's actually a structural description.
Okay.
Think about it. In a massive blockbuster like the main 28 Years Later, you have to hit all four quadrants. You need the romance, the explosions, the hero's journey, all of it.
Right. You have to please everyone, from the teenagers to the grandparents.
Exactly. And it ends up being huge, but maybe a bit bloated. But a DLC movie, that implies you can take the assets you already have, the world, the actors, the lore, and just tell a weird, specific, niche story.
One that wouldn't survive in a billion-dollar blockbuster.
Precisely. It's narrower, but potentially deeper.
So it's not lesser than, it's just distinct,
Blah.
like a side quest in a role-playing game. You just veer off the main path to explore a creepy cave for a bit.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that leads directly to the identity crisis this film is having. The marketing, the posters, the trailers, they're all selling this as a spin-off.
Right, hence the subtitle, The Bone Temple.
But the reviewer points out that narratively it functions as a direct sequel.
And see, that's where I got confused reading the notes. How can it be a spin-off if it picks up exactly where the last one ended?
That's the friction. The film follows Spike. If you saw the previous film, you know Spike is our main guy. The movie apparently wastes zero time. It drops us right back into his nightmare, continuing his specific journey from the exact second we left him.
Okay, so if I'm following the same protagonist, literally seconds later, that's a sequel. The Empire Strikes Back is a sequel to A New Hope. You wouldn't call Empire a DLC pack.
True. But I think the distinction here comes down to scope. A sequel usually advances the entire world, the main conflict. This movie seems to be saying, here's an intense, self-contained adventure Spike went on.
So it's like a bridge.
Or, to stick with our gaming analogy, it's an expansion pack. It fleshes out the world without necessarily moving the main war forward.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a deep dive, no pun intended, into a specific corner of this world that the main saga didn't have time to explore.
And speaking of corners of the world, let's unpack the situation Spike finds himself in, because it sounds, intense doesn't quite cover it.
It is certainly a departure from your standard zombie survival setup.
A departure is putting it mildly. The reviewer describes the group Spike encounters with one of the most insane descriptions I've heard in a long time. I honestly thought he was joking at first.
Oh, I know the one.
He calls them a crew that looks like Spinal Tap if they were born in the Village of the Damned.
It is quite the visual, isn't it? I mean, stop and picture that. Spinal Tap. So we're talking, big hair, leather pants, and electric guitars in the apocalypse.
Picture that, but strip away all the parody and inject it with pure nightmare fuel. The Village of the Damned part brings in the glowing eyes, the cult-like vibe, the creepiness.
So it's that absurd, 80s glam rock aesthetic.
The studs, the leather, the excess, yeah. But the people wearing it have this murderous, satanic agenda.
That is a choice. It sounds ridiculous on paper.
It is ridiculous, but again, that's the DLC energy we talked about. You can get away with satanic glam rock zombies in a side story. You probably couldn't put that in the main tentpole film without people just checking out.
Right, and the tone seems to be pure dread. The leader of this Spinal Tap group is described as a sadistic, satanic figure, and Spike isn't just a guest, he's a prisoner.
Right. And this brings us to storyline A. The reviewer outlines that this is, at its core, a story about captivity and corruption. Spike is just a kid in this context. He's scared, and he's surrounded by these larger-than-life, terrifying figures who are just focused on murder and torture.
The source notes that the danger isn't just physical. Yes, Spike could be killed, but there's a psychological thriller element here.
Exactly. It's the fear of corruption.
Right.
If you are immersed in that level of brutality for long enough, does it stop being shocking? Do you start to accept it as the new normal just to survive? The audience is rooting for him to escape, not just to save his life, but to save his soul before he becomes one of them.
Which is a compelling hook. But I have to play devil's advocate here. And the reviewer does too. Haven't we seen this? The whole humans are the real monsters thing.
We have. It is probably the most well-worn trope in the genre. Whether it's The Walking Dead or The Last of Us, we always end up there.
That the zombies are just a force of nature, and the guys with the guns are the real problem.
Yeah, and the reviewer seems to think this movie leans pretty hard on that. He critiques it for checking those boxes. It relies on standard scumbags controlling people through fear beats, and it apparently gets very graphic.
Yeah, the term torture porn was used.
It was.
Which, honestly, is a heavy way to start 2026. The reviewer literally says the year is coming out swinging with the torture porn elements.
So if you're squeamish, this final damn storyline might be a rough watch.
It definitely sounds like it. But it seems to serve a purpose, though. It acts as a counterweight. Because while storyline A is gritty and visceral, all blood and letter storyline B is where the movie finds its unique identity.
Yeah, it pivots to something almost elegant. And that centers on the titular location, the Bone Temple.
And the man running the show. We have to talk about him. Played by Ray Fiennes, or Ralph Fiennes for the purists.
The reviewer calls him Ray Fiennes, so we're sticking with that.
We're rolling with Ray Fiennes. So we have this structure, the Bone Temple, which the reviewer calls a super skull structure. I'm trying to picture this. Is it a house? A castle?
Think of a tower, a fortress, but the primary building material is human remains.
Lovely.
It's macabre, certainly, but there's a detail from the source that really stuck with me.
What's that?
Spike's mother's skull is placed at the very tip-top of the structure.
Wait, his mom.
His mom.
That is... Talk about family trauma. That is incredibly messed up.
It adds a very personal, very disturbing connection between the two storylines. It just looms over everything. But what's fascinating here is the character of the doctor, Ray Fiennes' character. Despite the movie being named after his location, the Bone Temple, the reviewer notes he strangely feels like a support character for a large chunk of the film.
Which is odd for an actor of his caliber.
Yeah.
Usually if you get Ralph Fiennes, he's the main villain or the main mentor. So what's he actually doing in this skull tower? He isn't just interior decorating with bones.
No, he's running an experiment. And this is where the film pivots from standard survival horror to something more philosophical. The doctor is investigating the alphas, specifically an infected individual named Samson. He wants to know if they retain higher brain functions.
He's looking for a cure. Or just intelligence.
He's looking for humanity. He wants to know if the person is still in there.
Okay, this leads to one of the funniest observations in the review. The movie is called 28 Years Later.
Correct.
So it's been almost 3 decades since the outbreak.
Yes.
And the reviewer points out that the doctor is just now starting to hypothesize about brain function.
It is a valid critique of the logic.
It's hilarious. The reviewer jokes that he seemingly waited until his skull tower was complete. Like, okay, the feng shui is finally right with these bones. The aesthetic is perfect. Now I can do science.
I cannot possibly look through this microscope until I have 5,000 skulls stacked in the foyer.
Exactly. Priorities, right.
But if we look past the funny timeline issue, the question he's asking is actually profound. And the reviewer does a great job explaining why this matters by comparing the undead to the infected.
Okay, lay it out for me. A zombie is a zombie, right? Why does it matter?
Well, in traditional lore Night of the Living Dead, The Walking Dead, the creature is reanimated, the person died, their heart stopped. The thing walking around is just a corpse running on autopilot.
Right. There's no moral ambiguity. It's just meat moving around. You shoot it, you don't feel bad.
Exactly. But in the 28 Days franchise, they have never been undead. They are infected with the rage virus.
They're still biologically living humans.
Their hearts are beating, they're breathing, they need food. They are just incredibly violently sick.
Which changes everything.
It changes the entire ethical landscape. And that's what Ray Fiennes is testing. The doctor knows they're alive, so he asks, is there a cure? And if there is a cure, is killing them murder? If they have higher brain function, are they suffering?
Oof. That is heavy. That turns the hero narrative completely upside down. Think about the last 28 years of this franchise. Every time a hero mowed down a crowd of infected, were they killing monsters?
Or were they mass murdering sick patients? That's the horror. It's not survival anymore, it's tragedy. And the reviewer says Ray Fiennes really sells this.
The phrase used is that his performance is an absolute joy, which is really saying something for a movie with skull towers and torture porn.
It's his delivery. The reviewer describes it as a dry execution of his inner monologues. He just says exactly what's on his mind in such a matter-of-fact way that it provides humor without breaking the tension.
I love characters like that. The world is ending, and this guy is just dryly narrating his scientific process surrounded by bones. The reviewer mentions you can't help but chuckle.
It sounds like he brings a necessary levity and gravitas. He grounds the DLC feel of the movie. Even if the plot feels like a side quest, his performance elevates it.
So we have these two really different threads. We have Spike in a Spinal Tap torture porn situation, and we have Ray Fiennes doing philosophy in a bone tower. How on earth did these fit together?
Well, the reviewer acknowledges that initial confusion. You're watching the first half thinking, how do these two stories mix? They feel like they belong in different genres.
But they do converge.
Apparently they do. And when they do, the source material gets really excited. The reviewer describes the finale as unabashedly badass and fun.
And that's crucial. You can have all the philosophy you want. This is a genre film. It needs to deliver on the thrill.
It needs the fireworks. And the reviewer mentions the audience reaction in the theater. People were laughing and cheering.
Not laughing at the movie, but with it.
Exactly, laughing with delight at how it all went down. Largely due to Ray Fiennes, again. It seems his character's arc and how it all resolves provides a sense of catharsis that the audience really responded to.
It sounds like the science meets the violence in a very satisfying way.
Yeah, and it's interesting to compare this to the previous film, 28 years later. The reviewer felt that one was a bit awkward, like it switched genres halfway through. But for the Bone Temple, he says it remains consistent. Even though it juggles the torture and the temple, it doesn't feel like two different movies glued together. It flows. The reviewer notes he was never bored.
Which is high praise for a genre that can sometimes just drag in the middle. We've all seen those zombie movies where they find a safe house and talk for 45 minutes about their feelings.
It sounds like this movie just keeps the pedal down. It creates a very specific tone. Grit, style, and humor all mixed together successfully.
He even jokes that no alcohol was required to enjoy it.
Which, for a January release, is a significant endorsement.
Right. We joked about Dump Month, but usually if a horror movie drops in January, you brace for impact. You expect it to be unwatchable.
Yeah.
This one seems to defy the calendar curse.
It does, and I think that goes back to that DLC concept we started with. By keeping the scope focused on Spike, on the Bone Temple, it avoids the bloat that plagues big sequels. It doesn't try to save the world.
It just tries to tell a tight, entertaining story about a guy, a cult, and a scientist.
And it sounds like it succeeds.
So if we look at the final verdict from our source, Jeremy Jans just calls it a good time.
Simple, effective, a good time.
And for a movie about infection and torture, that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back to something because I think it's the most interesting takeaway here. This idea of the infected lore.
Yes. This is the real legacy of the film, I think.
This movie seems to be doing the heavy lifting that maybe the main franchise skimmed over. It's actually asking the hard questions about the nature of the enemy.
It is. And it validates the existence of this spin-off model. If 28 years later was the big action blockbuster, the Bone Temple is the intellectual and visceral companion piece. It explores the implications of the world.
It's almost like the filmmakers knew they had this cool, weird idea about a scientist in a skull tower that wouldn't fit in the main movie.
So they just made a whole separate movie for it. And honestly, it's a model I wouldn't mind seeing more of. Instead of cramming everything into a 3-hour epic, give us a tight main film and then a weird experimental DLC film that explores the lore.
I love that idea. It allows for more risks, like making a villain who looks like he's from Spinal Tap.
Exactly. You couldn't do that with a $200 million budget on the line, but in this format, anything goes.
So bringing it all home, what stands out to you most from this review? If you had to pin down the one thing that makes this movie worth checking out.
For me, it has to be Ray Fiennes. The source material is unequivocal about this. Without him, this might have been just another grim survival story about sadists in a wasteland. But with him, it becomes a character study wrapped in a horror film. His ability to bring that dry execution to a scene involving high-stakes experiments is what elevates the material.
I agree. The image of him methodically working through his hypothesis while the world burns is just compelling. And the fact that he waited 30 years to do it, it's funny, but it also speaks to human nature. Sometimes we just survive for a long time before we start asking why.
Or perhaps it speaks to the necessity of stability. Even a twisted stability, like a bone tower before science can happen. You can't hypothesize when you're running for your life.
You need a fortress, even a macabre one, to start thinking like a scientist again. That is a brilliant point. The Bone Temple isn't just a scary set piece, it's the first sign of civilization returning.
A weird, messed up civilization, but a place where people have time to think.
And that thinking is dangerous.
Exactly. Because once you start understanding the infected, you might not be able to treat them as monsters anymore.
And that leads us to the big question for you listening. We're leaving you with this thought today. The doctor's hypothesis in the movie opens this massive ethical door. In a world where the monster isn't a reanimated corpse, but just a very sick human being, at what point does survival become murder?
If the infected can think, if they have an inner life, what does that mean for the last 28 years of survival tactics? Every shot fired, every trap set. If there's a person still in there, the heroes aren't just survivors, there's something else entirely.
A chilling thought to end on. If you check out the Bone Temple, let us know if you think Ray finds the answer. Thanks for diving in with us.
Until next time.